Dr. Manuel Soto grew up in my hometown of Edward, Texas, and graduated from nearby Hogue High School. He earned a BA in biology in 1993 and an MA in biology in 1996, both from Texas A&M University, Kingsville. In 2001, he earned a PhD in coastal sciences from the Gulf Coast Research Laboratory at the University of Southern Mississippi. He is currently an associate professor of biological and health sciences at Texas A&M University, Kingsville, where he has authored several peer-reviewed manuscripts in international scientific journals. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Soto to both of his office.
I grew up in the same town as David did, as he said, and I'm a biology professor, and I do research in biology, and I decided to start painting art, and learning a little bit about my culture, and so I wrote a book about it. This is one of my paintings. This is I do all my paintings on wood because my dad was a carpenter, and anybody that's ever cut wood can smell the sawdust, and it gets in your blood. And before I start any painting, I think of him because I do that, and takes me back to a special place in Edward. That is a self-portrait of mine. I had never painted before up until like 3.5 years ago. So it took I'm still learning how to do that. I use mainly acrylic paints. And I was born in a small colonia. I was always around barns and ranches, and so I made a new home, a retro style barn house, and that's what it looks like, and that's one of my paintings, and it's also my art studio, and I have a few cattle there, and the name of the small ranchito is the Rocky Nest Land and Cattle, and all my paintings are signed with the Rocky Nest, and all my cows are branded with the Rocky Nest. All my 6 cows. Okay. So, as I said, why write this book? I'm not an artist, and I'm not a historian. And I say that because at the end of, I've been doing presentations for 20 years, 25 years. I've been an associate professor at Kingsville, and I've given probably 10, 20, 30,000 presentations. And I say that because at the end of some talks they will say, well, what about what happened in this? I'm not a historian, okay? Okay, and one of the things that came up recently in the Texas Board of Education was adopting a new textbook. And in the textbook they quoted Mexicans as lazy and they're having a mañana attitude, and I read that and I was in complete disbelief because I grew up with these people that were working all their lives out in the fields. And so I decided to give them a little bit of credit, and was writing this book about it. And also, I'm a biologist as well, and ecologist, and I know a little bit about population migrations, and so I looked up into how the Tejanos got to this area, and I'll cover that a little bit here. Okay, A Life in the South Texas Colonia is the title of my book, and where do we come from? We are mestizos. I'm going to cover how we exactly got here, what Tejanos are, what the plain looked like, what this area looked like before development, before Europeans got here. Now I'll talk a little bit about Edroy and some of the families in Edroy, especially mine because I know most about that, and so forth. Okay, how did we get here to South Texas? How did people get here to North America? How did we get here to North America? The Asians No, it's the Mayflower came in a lot later than that. First, I don't have a pointer, but the Asians crossed into Alaska. As soon as they crossed, now we call them what? Native Americans, right? But they were Asians. They crossed into it about 15,000, 20,000 years ago, something like that. Okay? And we used to call them Indians, but now we call them Native Americans, right? And then it wasn't 500 years ago when Christopher Columbus sailed the ocean blue, right? And colonized some of those areas. And there was a big colonization event around Veracruz, Mexico. And they started interbreeding there. And the outcome was this mixed population that we call the mestizos. Some of those mestizos migrated north into what we call modern day Texas. We call those people Tejanos, and that's what most of us are right now, right? So, if you think about it, this is probably the greatest conversions of humans that ever occurred in the world. Asians migrated into Alaska, and they ran into a little bit of a roadblock. They crossed the Bering Strait of Alaska, colonized this area, and then Europeans had already colonized that area, but they ran into a roadblock until they sailed the ocean, and they came, the populations, the world populations came together here and further south. Okay, and I had said I was going to put Edward in the map one day, and I did. And that's about where Edward is. All right. Okay, I'm not used to a clicker. Okay, here's all these are my original paintings. This is the first Native Americans encountering some of the Spanish fleets. Some of those fleets were sailing down the Gulf of Mexico and landed in Mexico. And that's a picture, that's a painting of Edroy, Texas. That is Smalltown, Texas, right there. Every small town has a skyline made up of grain bins, grain elevators, right? The molinos, and cotton gins. And every small town has a little Catholic church. And on the other side, a little Baptist church or some other churches and so forth. This isn't to scale. I had to omit some blocks of Edroy, believe it or not, but David Barrera lived somewhere in here.
Oh, I see him.
And that's right there. And that is where I grew up, right there. And some of you might have played bingo throughout the years in a little salon right by the... Did you play bingo there? All right. By the Catholic Church. Okay. Edroy is located off of, for those of you who don't know, right off of 37, Highway 37. And the railroad goes right through Edroy. This railroad started in San Antonio and ends up at the port of Corpus Christi. And it's called the San Antonio Uvalde Gulf Railroad. It's nicknamed the Sausage because of the letters it starts with. But that's important because it was finished in the early 1900s. And at that time, the United States was still developing. And they needed supplies to take to north and the eastern markets. And they used the railroad to do that, and they used Tejano laborers to load up commodity like mesquite wood and cotton and vegetables north. Okay, the population of Edroy has always been about 200 to about 500 people. During these huge vegetable harvests in the 1940s and 50s, the population would spike up to 10,000 people, something like that. It was a whole community, a whole larger community. We did have a post office there, and so forth. Okay, and y'all can stop me for some brief questions, not too long over question, okay? Okay, and then Edroy historically hasn't had a school. It did have a school, it was torn down. We had to go to a neighboring town of Odom, Texas, for school, and that's the school right there, and of course there's the skyline again of Odom. And Odom's a little bit larger. You can really tell the grains of and the knot of the wood there. And then that's my art studio. Okay. How did Edward got colonized about the early 1900s? The people started arriving from all over, especially from around this area here. Beeville and Goliad and Kennedy and Karn City. And they migrated there because there was a lot of work there because of the railroad. Let me back up a little bit. What did this area look like before Europeans got here? You walk outside, what did it look like? It was a grassland with a few clusters of oak trees, oak mottes. Okay? And Europeans got here, they brought cattle into Mexico, and they brought sheep and horses. And that happened about the 1600s, 1700s. And then they migrated further north, and the cattle brought with them mesquite trees, because the cattle ate the mesquite seed, and then they dropped it throughout, and then it sprouted all over. And now mesquite is found everywhere, right? And so if you want to farm this area, you have to clear it. And I'm not sure if you've ever tried to clear a big stump, mesquite stump, but it's a lot of work. And that's what the Tejanos had to do, and I have a little picture of that, I think, coming up. But anyway, that's one of the major jobs was being grubbers or desenraiceros. My grandfather was one of those, and he passed away. This is where Tejanos used to live in the early 1900s. This is row housing. It's very similar to some of the southern slave housing that was around in the southern parts of the United States, the southern eastern parts of the United States, like Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, all that area. He came home one day, and he could barely function. He couldn't dismount his horse. They had to help him dismount his horse. This was about 1935. Automobiles were still around, but he still liked to ride around on his horse. Automobiles were expensive too. And he lay down, and he could barely breathe. He was salivating from the mouth, foaming at the mouth, couldn't breathe. What did he die of? Tetanus. Tetanus causes muscles to freeze up, and especially the ones that are associated with breathing, and he was salivating. Those are accounts of my grandmother that had said that. And so they buried him, and my grandmother remained a widow after that. There's the idea that my grandmother, she worked cleaning houses and doing laundry for people. And then my mother's mother died of tuberculosis. She was from Kennedy. She's actually from Helena. I'm not sure if y'all know where that is, but she's from Helena, and her mother died of tuberculosis, and a month later, her grandfather died of tuberculosis. There's those big TB epidemics that were going around. There were sanatoriums all over the place to isolate people and so forth. Dying of an infectious disease was common before 1940, and after 1940, widespread use of modern medicine occurred, like vaccines and especially antibiotics for TB. Okay? So after that, they moved to this area, and my father courted my mother, and they got married, and I have a little section on that later. And one of the primary jobs of the Tejanos in this area was picking cotton, los pistadores. And I was modern machinery to pick cotton wasn't really developed widespread use until the late 1960s, early 1970s. I was born about that time, but I remember being on the side of the field when others would go picking the fields. And I'm not quite so blonde, but I was kind of blonde, brown-haired back then. And, so I had to put a little, to identify myself as a Tejano, I put a little, what do you call those things that rattle, the Mexican rattles? The maracas, yeah, I put one of those in my house. Cheering them on. Right? Okay, and then as you know, it gets hot here in Texas when cotton is being harvested around August and September, and lunchtime they had to go under cotton traders to seek shelter. And they told me about this in my sombra. Lazy people like to be in the abajo de la trela and all that, and not working and all that stuff. So a lot of these were, I remembered some, but a lot of these I had to go and interview some older folks and get some information about that. Okay, and this is the picture of the transformation from mesquite brushland to fields, cleared fields. And I had a little section in the book about this. And they grow corn, maize here in South Texas, and one of the popular things to do when it's about this time, I don't encourage anybody to do that because you go to jail. I mean, you get out, sometimes the farmers were nice and they would let us go and pick corn, but sometimes you just go. And they dropped us off, and we'd go run in there and come back, and my mom already had the pot boiling. All right. That's my dad's 1967 Chevy pickup at the time. Okay, and you walk, and not so much because everybody has air conditioning, but you walk down a Colonia street and you smell tortillas. Man, it was delicious. Because everybody had their windows open and stuff like that, and we'd all make friends. Hey, your mom's making tortillas over there. Right? Okay, and we also, Edroy had a grain elevator, had a grain elevator, cotton gin, and a cattle feedlot. And sometimes the cows would die accidentally, and some of the locals would ask for the offal, like the innards, because they knew some of those were edible and delicious. How many people have ever eaten the guts of a cow, parts of the guts and organs of a cow? Name some. Menudo, the stomach, tripas, the intestine. You what? Mollejas? Oh, man, all that stuff that the Tejanos already knew. Hey, give me that, right? Anyway, one of the things that, a story that I was told by this gentleman here, that's my cousin, but his grandfather used to do it. So one of the stories I told him is that I heard was that a little girl overheard grandmother saying, "Ahí viene el bofe, ahí viene el bofe." What's a bofe? when some of these cows got slaughtered, they would take the whole organs, and part of those were the lungs. And I had never heard of people eating lungs in this area, but they did, and the buffets are the lungs. And I've never had them, but apparently they're delicious, and I have a nice recipe in the book for you if you want to try. Okay. And if you have, there's large families in these colonias. They all worked on the fields and stuff. And if you take 10 kids to the barber and pay so-and-so, so people just bought clippers and there you go. Get out of here, right? And the ones that were misbehaving the most, who got the shortest haircut. And they called them pelon pelacas, right? Like careless wigs. Okay, Edroy, as I said, didn't have a school. We had to hitchhike to the neighboring schools. And we didn't have to, there was a bus, but if you wanted to play sports, we had to hitchhike back. And so many of us would do that, and sometimes that could be dangerous. But I'd never heard of anybody, you know, having a bad experience from that. Okay, and then this me trying to have in the summer it gets so hot, and the sorghum, what's planted here, sorghum is planted to feed cows and hogs, the grano. And it gets pretty in June, July, and that's kind of how it looks like. I call that one the living center. Okay, and then that's my dad trying to get a restaurant, because up until the 60s there was still a lot of segregation going on in this area. You couldn't go to the same restaurants, you couldn't, you know, do any of that stuff as well. So I included just a little vignettes that I write on each of these paintings. Okay, La Tronca y La Marrana. I should have another R, I think. We all had nicknames in this. I think that little trend custom is being lost, but we all had nicknames growing up, and my brother and his cousin, everybody was working on the fields, and they really didn't like to work. And what they liked to do was steal the little taquitos from people that were working, so they became a little plump. And so one of those was nicknamed the grapefruit, La Tronca, and the other one was nicknamed La Marrana. And sometimes these, man, that's downright cruel. It doesn't fly today. Right? Man, but there were other nicknames like, does anybody know of another nickname?
La pulga, la rata.
La pulga, la rata son la ratita, right? Okay. And then one of my first jobs was pulling weeds out in the fields. And not the first employer that I had was, but one of the first employers when I was in maybe 9th grade or 10th grade was David's grandfather. I asked him if I could go work in El Salon with him, and he said yes. And so he took me. And when you go out to hoe in the fields, you just load up the back of the truck. That doesn't fly anymore either. And so there's a bunch of people in the back of the truck of all ages and stuff. And I went with David's uncle and mother. And that's David's mother right there.
How old were you?
I was, I would think like 9th grade, something like that, because after that we got jobs like in the cotton gin, and a little bit more steady, higher paying, a little bit. Okay, and then some of us practice a culture called La Matanza, where we slaughter. Everybody back then had pigs in their lots, and we slaughtered them in the winter time for food. We would get all the manteca, the lard, and we use it to fry eggs and to make tortillas and to make the dough for the tortillas and all kinds of stuff like that. Barbecues, and my dad was always an animal lover, and he could kill the pigs that he raised, so he usually got a friend to do that, and he took the kids around the back so they wouldn't see the witness the scene. And so that's me and my father around the back. And, we also collect the blood, because the blood, after you cook the blood, along with other delicious items like the heart and the liver and the kidneys, it turns out to be delicious. How many people have ever had that? Oh yeah, right? You know. You know? Yeah, it's delicious. Okay, and I'm going to finish this first section by reading the last passage of the book, and then I'm going to start another short section, and that'll be it for the presentation. Y'all bear with me, don't lose interest. For centuries, Tejanos have lived, raised their families, and died in Texas. They were the first vaqueros, and they worked clearing land for farming. Tejanos worked in the pipeline and oil industry. They make the best tortillas and really good enchiladas. Some ate cow lungs and still eat pig's blood. They work in grain elevators, cotton gins, and feedlots. Tejanos hoed fields and picked cotton by hand. They picked watermelons and corn from fields. Tejanos cut their kids' hair. Some Tejanos fell in love in high school and eloped. They installed the first indoor toilet in their houses. Many Tejanos get assigned a nickname. Some have to hitchhike home after football practice. Tejanos will refuse service at restaurants. Finally, this Tejano writes a book to help both father and son better communicate and understand the difficulties of growing up in this rapidly changing world. Tejanos have historically been underappreciated for the role in shaping Texas. The Alamo is the icon of Texas history, yet Tejanos have not been properly acknowledged in their contribution to the Alamo and other significant events in Texas history. For example, few people know that Tejanos and Native Americans built the Alamo, and that Tejanos died inside the Alamo. The dust will not settle over Texas until we remember the Alamo with a more accurate and responsible understanding of the significant contributions of Tejanos in history. Okay, that was the first part, and that concludes the book. And it's available, it's $25. It's available if any of you want to buy it. The next section has to do with love, life, love, and marriage in the Texas Colonia. I was asked by the Bullock Museum in Austin to write a story about colonias, because they were going to open up a colonia division in the history part of the museum. And so they contacted me and they asked me to write something about that. And well, that was a little hard. They didn't want anything that I had done with the book because they wanted original stuff. And they were pretty demanding, even though they didn't pay me anything, but I did it because it's necessary to get the word out about things that happen in a small South Texas colonia. So I painted a picture of my mother and father as they would have looked. There is no pictures of my mom and dad when they first got married because they were poor. And cameras were expensive, taking photos were expensive and things like that. So I painted a picture of them drinking cafecito in the morning, and sometimes they would talk lovingly to each other. This article is available on the Bullock Museum, by the way, if any of you want to read it. It's in just go to the Museum, Stories of Texas. So they would talk lovingly to each other, but other times they would argue all the time, incessantly. And so sometimes I wondered why they got married, or divorce them already, right? I was young, but they stayed married for 49 years and raised 11 children. I'm the 11th, and I knew my mother had married at the age of 15, and that's partly because, I'm not sure why, I thought maybe all women married at the age of 15 in the 1940s and 50s. I didn't know. And my dad was 19. I just decided to ask questions. So I developed a questionnaire and interviewed 12 couples, or people representing 12 couples from Edroy about their marriages. Okay? All these were marriages about 19. David's grandmother and grandfather was one of the people I interviewed. All these were marriages from 1940s, 1950s, something like that. They were all born. They were all born between late 20s to 30s to 40s, something like that. So about the time of maybe a little bit later than World War II. Okay? And, well, I won't tell you that, but that's all right. So I asked both couples. The grooms were married about the age of 21. And the brides were married about the age of 19. And the average date of marriage was 1954. So the brides were married at about 19 years old. My mother was the exception. She married at 15. And she didn't have her first kid till probably 17 or something like that. But my guess is that her mother dying had a lot to do with her marrying early and things like that. Where did couples meet? They met in the cotton fields. And I remember, as you interview these old ladies, oh yeah, it was the best because you could see all the guys that were there, and you know, it was their social. It's almost like going to school at Coastal Bend College, right? They were all married. Almost all of them were married by the Justice of the Peace. 3 of them were married by the Catholic Church, but all of them got married by the Catholic Church before they had passed at some other later time. Some received gifts, some people didn't. I mean, these people were poor. 5 of the 12 couples received a molcajete. That's a molcajete. Did you?
I got one. I got a huge one.
Hell yeah! After I wrote this article, I saw in a little news release that the #1 bridal registry gift was KitchenAid blender or something like that.
And I still use mine too.
There you go. I still have my mom's and my aunt's, I think. Rings. 7 of the 12 exchanged a ring. Only 2 of those rings had a diamond, and that diamond was small. So, the ladies of Edroy were more likely to get a molcajete than a diamond. That was love. If you got it. 80% of the grooms kissed their wives to begin their new life. And the other ones didn't remember. In the case, both my mom and dad have passed away, and we kind of pieced, me and my siblings kind of pieced their marriage together. We didn't know that, so whether they kissed or not. But some of those old ladies, they acted out on the first kiss, and it was the sweetest thing that you could witness. They had big families, 8 children, an average of 8 children. Some had more, some had less. We had 11. Marriages lasted for 45 years. And in Edroy, they last till death do they part. There were no divorces. So why did couples get married in Edroy? 100% of the people said for love. And an 85-year-old lady succinctly, eloquently said, en Edroy, los casábamos por amor y nada. For love, only for love, we had nothing else.